Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Eternal news episode here on EternalTitans.com. And yeah, we just got hit with yet another balance change patch, and this is even bigger than the last one. So yeah, and also this one came completely unannounced. The announcement just dropped earlier, and I assume the patch will be implemented later today, so I would assume in the afternoon or evening hours of Europe time. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack, so let's get started. Okay, so first off, the merchants are getting changed. Yet again, this time it's the pushed Red Canyon and Hidden Road smugglers, which makes a lot of sense. I actually have been talking about this with some of my viewers on the last stream, where yeah, there was like some consideration about what's the problem in Winchest, and the consensus seemed to be that yeah, the having 8 smugglers, and especially 8 such high quality smugglers that are so much better than the other smugglers and merchants, is a big part of it. And I agreed with the sentiment of one of my viewers that yeah, the smugglers either need to be brought down or the other smugglers need to be brought up to their level, or both those smugglers brought down a bit and the others brought up a bit. So what we're seeing here is those smugglers being brought down, losing 1 stat point each. A Red Canyon smuggler going from 2-3 to a 2-2, making it much worse in more defensive strategies like the Winchest midrange deck, since the 3rd health point is very crucial to being a decent defensive 3-drop usually, so to not having to trade your 3-drop into like an Oni Ronin, for example, but instead yeah, walling off early drops like Dusk Raider, Oni Ronin, that sort of stuff. Now Smuggler is still okay-ish in aggressive decks, since losing that 1 toughness, the 1 health point, isn't that big of a deal here. Don't get me wrong, it's still relevant, but if you care more about attacking, the fact that it's still effectively a 4-2 that benefits twice from cards like Finest Hour and weapons that you put on it is still more relevant than the fact that your opponent can now better trade with it with their earlier drops on defense. And Hidden Road Smugglers change is one that I like even more. Simply bringing it down to a 2-3 keeps the whole like defensive nature intact. Like I said, the 3 health is very critical on a 3-drop, I think, and maintaining that is a big deal here. Losing 1 attack also reduces the impact of its lifesteal, since you only gain 2 health per block per combat compared to 3. So yeah, pretty good changes here. I would have liked to see a bit of a buff to at least the Ebon Dune Smuggler, bringing it up to like a 2-3 as well. I don't see how Ambush is more relevant than the lifesteal on Hidden Road Smuggler. I think they are at least equal, and given the colors that Ebon Dune Smuggler is in, I think that the lifesteal on the Argentport Smuggler is actually worth a bit more than the ambush on the Xenon Smuggler. If this Smuggler would be in a color combination that lends itself more to fast spell heavier controlling decks, then I think the ambush would be hugely valuable, because then you are not forced to proactively spend your 3rd turn on something like that, but you can just do it at the end of turn if there's nothing else you need to do. But in Xenon, that's just not that relevant, I think, or in Xenon base decks. So yeah, would have liked to see a buff there, but maybe in the future we'll see. But unlikely. Seems more that they're more inclined to nerf the market mechanic and pull it back, rather than bring up some of the weaker elements there. Anyway, on to the next change. Next change is concerning lifesteal. The amount of good lifesteal units, good mid-rangey lifesteal units in the game has been constantly increasing, just recently with the release of Hidden Road Smuggler, before we got Vara, before that we got Rizan and so on. And lifesteal is a pretty powerful mechanic, the way the game is designed, and yeah, a pretty big hurdle for aggressive decks to keep up, because every time your opponent drops one of these lifesteal creatures and you cannot immediately shut it down, it's gonna cause a lot of trouble and make it really hard to overcome the opponent, especially if it's a bigger lifesteal card like Rizan or Vara, for example. So yeah, what we see is Rizan now needs 6 spells to have lifesteal instead of 3, which is a massive nerf. That basically means that in most decks and most cases, Rizan won't have lifesteal until pretty late in the game, so your first Rizan will almost never have lifesteal. And unless a deck is very spell heavy and specifically working towards getting spells into the void, I think it's going to be really hard to play your first Rizan on turn 6 or 7 with lifesteal ever, and that's a pretty big deal because that makes Rizan actually a lot worse, since a 6-cost 5/4 flying that deals 3 damage with Reckless is a lot worse. The Reckless now becomes a really big downside. In the past, the Reckless was kind of whatever, because if your unit has lifesteal, attacking isn't that much worse than blocking. Sometimes it's even better than blocking if you can attack for free, because it puts pressure on the opponent. It safely absorbs 5 damage effectively that you gain from your opponent, while if you stay home to block and the opponent either wins the battle with a combat trick and you only gain 5 health once, or the opponent even has an answer to prevent your Rizan from blocking, then you're suddenly way behind. But now that Rizan can neither gain you life or like health usually, especially the first Rizan, and also has to attack and cannot block except for the turn that it comes down, makes the card much, much worse. I think he now went from one of the best units and one of the best cards in the game to just a solid card, I would assume. But we'll have to see how it shakes out. But requiring 6 spells is massive. I remember that a fair share of decks already had issues reliably having the 3 spells on 6, like for example the Rakano deck that we built for the first ECQ that Turbo won the ETS World with, was one of those decks that frequently against aggro was sitting there with a Rizan on 6 power, dropping Rizan without lifesteal and losing because of it, and that was with only 3 spells. Now with 6 spells, decks like that will basically never have lifesteal on their Rizan, while decks like these FJS and or rather Winchest and Ixtun decks will be a bit better off because they are more spell heavy, but they still usually won't have lifesteal on Rizan on turn 6 or 7, but the second Rizan should usually have it. So yeah, pretty big change there, and definitely opens up things for aggressive strategies much more, which is cool because aggressive decks have had a hard time at the top level for quite a while. So the other change is buffing 2 cards that fight lifesteal in a nice way. First off, Ankle Cutter just got additional utility. Now it doesn't only kill endurance units, but it also kills lifesteal units with its ability, which is pretty interesting and makes the card much more of a consideration both in the main deck or the market of certain aggressive strategies, because now there is a unit in almost every mid-range or controlling deck that plays units that you can and want to deal with Ankle Cutter. And combining that with ways to easily deal damage to these units, either be it with quick draw attackers or just cards like Torch, Rockslide and stuff like that, to just ping them somehow, is a pretty big deal and can create massive tempo swings and turn these lifesteal units into a potential liability for your opponent, which is pretty interesting. So I'm definitely gonna keep an eye on the card and see if it fits in somewhere nicely. I already liked it at times as like a market option in Skycrag when I experimented with a market in Skycrag when Sandstorm Titan was much more prevalent, which is a card that the deck historically has a lot of problems with, and Anchor Cutter gives you a good way to fight that. And now this also applies to cards like Vara. The other change is actually a pretty big one, I think. Factory Quota now costs 2 power instead of 3, which is pretty big. The fact that the card potentially deals 2 damage a turn makes it effectively a pretty decent 2-drop against slower, more reactive decks. And then the Lifesteal Suppression is almost a free roll that you kind of get in the process of that, and almost kind of makes this card a potential main deck consideration in certain decks and certain fields. So this is pretty interesting, and an even more powerful and effective market card, being able to sometimes get it and play it right away on 5 power is pretty big. So that card is definitely much more appealing and playable now. And even if you don't play it right away, like you play Merchant on turn 3, get it, on turn 4 you play Quota and another 2-drop, which is very doable in an aggro deck, and much better than playing a 3-cost Quota and then having to have another 1-cost card to go along with it, which is probably a little less likely to happen. Okay, next we have Sights and Removal. First off, Howling Peak finally got the nerf that people were hoping for or expecting. First, the durability has been reduced to 4, which I think makes a lot of sense. I honestly don't get why it had 5 durability. Like, no other side has that much durability, and this also happens to be possibly the best or tied for the best side in terms of just effects. Like, Disso's Office is similarly powerful, but 1 power more expensive, and had 1 durability less than Howling Peak, so now they are at least at the same level. It still doesn't die to, say, Rizan, which is kind of important because otherwise the opponent could kill it right away, and the other sides that die to Rizan usually could be in play for a turn or 2, giving you 2 or 3 parts of the agenda before the opponent even has the chance to Rizan them. They also brought down the kind of static effect that it gives, the +2 health. It used to give +3 health to a unit that you play, and now it only gives +2 health. That is another pretty relevant nerf, and I think a pretty good one, because the card kind of just did way too much for its static ability compared to other sides. The +3 health was just obnoxious. Like, you play a 4 health unit and it's 7 health, so the opponent can basically not attack your side with anything successfully, making this side exceptionally hard to kill. And now the +2 health means a lot of things line up a lot better. Some stuff can be killed with weapons now that couldn't be before, and stuff like that. They block significantly less well, and like, for example, a Jotun Feastcaller as a 4/7 could block almost everything. Now as a 4/6 you can at least attack into it with like big units like Heart of the Vault and stuff. So yeah, I really like those changes. I think it's a very good way to pull back the side without making it unplayable or fringe playable. It's basically as playable as before. It's just not as dominant as before, and much better to tackle. Next we have a change to Avigraft. Honestly, I didn't quite feel that was necessary, but I mean, the card has a lot of feel bad, and even though with 4 offs of a card in the 75 card deck, this is even less relevant than it is, say, in Magic with these type effects, and the removal was fairly limited, only targeting non-flying units and having a downside when the opponent blows it up. But yeah, now it costs 4, just like in Cold Blood, basically. I felt that it was fine at 3 compared to in Cold Blood, because it has a lot more downsides, not targeting flyers, being blocked by Face Aegis, giving the opponent something when they kill it. So there's also counterplay, which in Cold Blood doesn't have. If the units have Void Bound and are extracted from your deck, they're gone. and so on. But then again, in Cold Blood, at least extract the cards from your deck, so you couldn't draw dead cards. So yeah, now the card costs 4 instead of 3, which I think mostly kills the card, honestly. I think now it's going to be like only a market option. I don't think you can remotely justify playing a non-universal 4-cost non-fast removal. Even 4-cost universal fast removal like Deathstrike is not playable, so neither is this outside of market counterplay against tokens or recursion type stuff. Next we have kind of a historical first. We're seeing an almost rollback of an old nerf, which is pretty cool, because I think the way they change Levitate now is the way they should have changed it last time. Now Levitate costs 1 again, but can only be played on your units. So instead of making it cost 2, I would have liked to see them make it just target your own units right away last time. So I think this is an amazing change. Puts a card back into Constructed that has prior been taken out and opens up a whole lot of old and new possibilities. People can experiment with Alessi, grow type strategies again. People can experiment with Fanatic Gorgon, Beast Caller type stuff again, and so on. So yeah, having a tool back that was taken from us, yet limited, is pretty nice. Now it's still pretty unplayable for like reactive controlling decks that could use it before to just cycle through their deck and or pop Aegis on units. Still can't do that, but yeah, the proactive decks that mourned the loss of old Levitate now have it back, which is great. Next, Thalchi, Herald of War, is getting a buff, which is a bit surprising to me, because the card is really powerful, I think. But yeah, now it also has Overwhelm, in addition to its charge, making it better at taking down sites, because the opponent needs a big enough blocker to actually protect their sites, which is the intent of this change. They just want to give people more tools, especially time, to deal with sites, because time is in a rough spot right now, and part of that is how poorly they can deal with sites with a lack of removal to clear the path and just being kind of like blocked. So yeah, not that I needed any more convincing to put Thalchi in a constructed deck, other than that I have issues finding a deck in the color combination that I'm happy with. Now the card is even better. The card is just an absolute powerhouse. Just gotta see if we can figure out a Yennefer shell that is good enough for it. Next we have Zeratul Bull. It used to cost 7 in double time, now it costs 6. I think this is an insane buff, and the card is actually now very constructed playable. The card was almost reasonable before, since charge is such a good keyword, even better than lifesteal, I think. But like, charge is probably the best keyword, and then we have like Aegis, and then we have lifesteal, I would say, in that order in terms of like battle skills. And yeah, charge is just incredibly powerful ability in this game, especially with so much lack of good universal fast removal, making your charge unit very safe to hit at least once. And yeah, Zeratul Bull being a 7/6 and eating an attachment just on attack, and with charge the opponent cannot deny that. Yeah, basically means you just get a 2-for-1 right away, hit the opponent for 7, and then they can just play a removal on it, and all that for 6 power. Sure, you need to play enough dinosaurs for it to have charge, but there are a couple of good constructed dinosaurs like Worldbreaker, Behemoth and stuff like that, so definitely interesting and worth looking into now, because yeah, 6 cost, 7/6 charges with upside are pretty good cards constructed. So pretty excited for that change. Another change is a buff to Amaranth Stinger. It now puts 5 Scorpion Traps into the enemy deck instead of 3. It puts them in the top 20 cards, if I'm not mistaken. So basically you have a 25% chance to get a Scorpion each draw step of your opponent, and chances for chains, and the chance increases each draw step slightly. But yeah, still not seeing this card being particularly relevant in Constructed. A 2/4 is a weird stat for a charger needing to infiltrate. For the ability as a 2/4, also not that easy. So all in all, not a great card. And last but not least, for the sides and removal changes, we have a change to Darikathane. Darikathane now increases cost of an enemy spell or site, so it can also delay a site, which is pretty cool. The card was pretty decent before, and I have played it at times, and think the card is definitely a Constructed level card, even though a bit situational and fringe. And now it gets a bit more utility, because delaying some of the more top-end sites like Peak and Office by another turn is very strong. And if your deck is looking for an early defensive 2-drop that can later turn into a pretty good threat and provide some disruption, Darikathane is a great card. Next, we have a bit of a buff to some build-arounds that they want to kind of push, which is cool. First off, another kind of reroll of a prior nerf in a way that they should have done first time around, if you ask me. Vara now basically works like she used to, the big Vara, except that the unit that she returns gets Voidbound, which is totally fine. That's a really nice nerf, keeps the core play pattern intact that she used to have, or rather brings back the core play pattern that she used to have, and just limits the the amount of value you can gain from here, because you can't just get back your, I don't know, your Gorgon Fanatic each turn and stuff like that. You can only get everything back once, but that's already enough and just kind of limits the deep grind potential of the card to a reasonable level, which is very fine. And yeah, we all know what that means. Fan Reanimator is probably back between Levitate and Vara being back, so definitely gonna mess around with that one, among others. So this is great news. Also, Vara works pretty well with Azindel revealed and stuff like that, so there's a bunch of really really powerful things here. Like, yeah, I mean, this is just really sweet. I think the two Wisps from Azindel should even trigger Vara to give you back 2 more units, so there should be some really powerful things you can do going forward, and I'm excited to try it. Next, there's Anya, Arctic Sheriff. You remember in my review how I talked about that she would be so much more playable if she was a 4/4, but that not sure if they would go for that, because it could be a bit too good with all the tempo swinginess that she has going for her, and how obnoxious she gets once you trigger her renown. But yeah, here it is. Anya, Arctic Sheriff now is a 4/4, so that's pretty sweet. Definitely makes the card more of a Constructed consideration, because now she blocks better the turn she comes down and dies to a lot less nonsense, especially Dodge and Rizan. So yeah, she's now actually a real consideration for Constructed, and we'll see if there's something is like a deck that makes her work. Now she combines pretty nicely with Clutch of Talons, for example, so that's something to look into. Also, Calderon Cradle finally got a buff. Not sure if that makes the card finally playable, but it definitely makes the card less bad, since now it costs 3 instead of 4, making it a bit more likely to get to that first dragon in time and not having to spend too many of your spells before you even get your Cradle out. And the other change is Shroud of the Spire, also went from 4 to 3 cost. might also actually make this strategy more interesting, especially with like having virtually 7 copies with merchants potentially. So yeah, still probably not gonna be a top tier strategy, but maybe there is a decent strategy involving Shard of the Spire and Calderan Cradle now that's at least playable to just enjoy the cards and win more than you lose, rather than just having a miserable deck that gives you a miserable experience because it just feels so underpowered and you just get stomped by good decks. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And we are still not done yet. They really, like they promised in the beginning, it's going to be a long one. So last but not least, we have some draft changes. Mighty Strikes now cost 3, making it finally completely dead for Constructed. I never thought it was very Constructed playable. Some other people tried it, and now it's utterly unplayable in Constructed. Apparently it was too strong in Limited. I still have not played the format, so no opinion on that. Broken Wing Brawler went from a 3/4 to a 3/3. I think that was the 5-cost 3/4 that gains Flying and Warcry with a power. Apparently another one of those evasive Justice top-end commons that turned out a bit too strong, and now it got dialed back, losing that critical 4th health point that makes it very good at attacking into most of the frequently met flyers in the game, and now yeah, is a bit easier to deal with on defense with other flyers, I guess. Blaze went from 5 to 4 cost, making the card yeah, a bit more reasonably cost and curve a bit better with certain things. Might even be a bit more interesting and constructed, but still probably too situational and specific to be relevant there. Lethrai Intimidator now only costs a single shadow and is a 2/4. So another solid buff there. Card was a bit weak in terms of stats and restrictiveness for what it does. Now it's a bit more flexible and yeah, a little more impactful as a body rather than just the ability. Also Resilient Wagoneer, like I said in the review, was just too weak, just needed too many things to go right to even be a decent unit, and now it gets +2/+2 for each of your units instead of +1/+1, making it a much nicer kind of high roll 3-drop. You go 2-drop into 3-drop into 4-drop plus actually not a 4-drop, but like a 2 or 3-drop or something on turn 4, and then empower it. It actually is a 5/5 and attacks for 5, making it a really good threat, but an unreliable and high variance one, because it's blank on defense, doesn't do anything the turn it comes down, to kind of keep the opponent from attacking before you can start a race on them, and requires you to have enough units in play, and also requires you to have constant flow of power to trigger the empower, which is still not an easy task. But yeah, now with just one other unit in play, it's a 3/3 like before, but once you have a second unit, it's a 5/5 instead of a 4/4. Because before it got +1/+1 for each of your units, now it's +2/+2 for each of your other units, so it doesn't count for itself anymore. So it just scales a little bit better, making it definitely a bit of a better card that requires yeah, less fewer other units to be a reasonable threat. Then Scavenge now costs 3 instead of 2 and gives you 3 reds instead of 2. Basically, Shadow now has a bad version of Assembly Line, which is still pretty strong, giving you a whole lot more token options. The fact that these tokens can't block definitely is relevant, but there might be strategies where this doesn't matter as much. And yeah, definitely pretty interesting change and could even be pretty relevant to Constructed. Also, Lazy Fire main now is a 3-2 instead of a 3-3, but on Renown it gets you get 2 1/1 Wildcats with charge instead of 1 like before. So this almost makes the card interesting for Constructed in certain cases, like for example in a Praxis token deck this would be really good, except that the deck usually can't trigger Renown, unfortunately. But yeah, this is another card that could actually be interesting for specific Constructed decks given the right circumstances. And last but not least, Consuming Greed now is a 4-cost 2/1 instead of a 5-cost 3/1. It also costs single shadow, making it splashable in limited. So yeah, Consuming Greed I think was already pretty good at 5, and now is even better at 4. I think losing 1 attack is not as much of a loss as costing 1 less and only requiring a single shadow, I think. So yeah, lots of changes. I like basically all the changes, so I think Direwolf did a pretty good job on these changes. Lots of interesting things here that should really shake up Constructed and give us a whole lot of new and old things to try, and new old things because some of these things were not viable for a while, but now can be re-evaluated with the new card pool, and I'm excited for that. So catch me on my next stream, trying out a lot of new things with these changes, and yeah, see how it goes. Alright, that's it again for this time. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll put the link to the patch notes in the description for you to check out yourself and read the explanations of Direwolf. And yeah, if you enjoy the content, hit the like button, leave a comment, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. You can also find all further info to my social media and stuff like that in the description. And yeah, one last thing, if you want to keep the free content going, please consider whitelisting EternalTitans.com and YouTube in your ad block. That would really help a lot. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time. Bye.